all of you are good problem solvers. This is a hospital for children. You have problems that come in every day, sick children who are in very dire need of your help, and you don't know what's wrong in the beginning, right? You probably go through a diagnostic process of trying to figure out what's wrong. Maybe a child, all of her organs are failing, you don't know why, you have to figure out why. And then you might not even know if the first treatment you use is going to work, and then you might have to try another treatment and another treatment. Your marriage is the same way. It's a big problem. It's like that kid with all of the organs failing, and you don't know why, and you have to sit there and go, okay, which organ do I treat first and why? And you don't know if the first treatment you use is going to work. It might not. And that doesn't mean your marriage is going to fail. It just means you need to try another treatment, and try another treatment, and try another treatment. So it's about problem solving. And you all know how to do it because you're doing it every day here. Okay, I just have to get to the next page. Okay, and what I would suggest you do is to make it a 4-month project. At the beginning of your project, you rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being, I wish he would just drop dead, and 10 being, I am so happy he's in my life, or he or she. Okay? You rate it at the beginning of your project. 4 months later, you rate your marriage again. If your rating went up, let's say it was a 1 when you started and now it's a 3, you keep trying to improve your marriage because your marriage has potential, it's improving. Let's say nothing happened or it got worse. I mean, it could get worse. It was a 1 and now it's a -16. Well, your marriage is probably hopeless. But, you know, we'd all like to have that magic 8 ball where we're like, should I work on my marriage? Maybe. I don't know what it's going to say. But we don't. So this is the only way you can really find out for sure whether or not your marriage has potential, is to give yourself a deadline, and you have to do something during these 4 months. You can't just ignore it and say, okay, let's just see if it gets better. Or no, you need to try something. Whatever your treatment is going to be, whether it's marital counseling, reading books, doing some of the things I'm going to suggest, and then see by the end of 4 months if you're improving. So one thing that you can do right now, you can actually go home and do this with your spouse tonight. I want you to think of an issue. There might be 500 million things wrong with your marriage. I want you to think of just one. One thing that you're going to go home tonight and ask your spouse if you can talk about it. And it might be as simple as, he leaves banana peels on by the lazy boy, my husband does this. Or it might be as complex as how he initiates sex, or the fact that there's not enough romance in your marriage. Whatever it is, think of one thing that you want to talk about with your spouse. And then when you go home tonight, say, honey, I'd like to talk with you about something. Let me know a good time. Because it might not be a good time right then. It might be, well, it's not Monday, but it might be some big sport night. It might be something else. You know, she might have book club. Who knows? Get a time that's good for both of you and sit down and talk about this one thing. And you don't say, blame, it's your fault. No, you say, I have this problem, because this one thing is a problem, and I'd like to talk to you about it. And it's a problem because, and you might get into how you feel about it if you're a woman. You might not if you're a guy. It's all depending on how you know, whatever. And then you say, I'd like you to help me solve this. And so that way you are not blaming and casting blame, because that's what gets us into arguments. If you cast it as a problem, and then you want to try to solve the problem together, and then you might even have a few solutions. You might say, you know, I think this might work. What do you think? And he might say, no, I don't think that'll work. How about this? And try not to get too attached to your solutions, because neither one of you knows which solution is going to work. We get very attached to our solutions, and we want to win the argument, and we want it to be our way, but it really doesn't matter as long as you try something, because trying something is better than where you are right now, okay? And just know that with communication, keep practicing, because, you know, you're going to screw up, you're going to curse, you're going to lose your temper every once in a while. It happens. But if you keep communicating over time, you'll get a lot better at it, and you'll be able to just have nice, calm conversations. Okay, and so here's some other things that you can think about. Think about why you married your spouse, why you're together with your current boyfriend or girlfriend. Very, very important question, because when you've been married a long time, and especially if your marriage is in a bad place, you can't remember. Like, I used to think, I was like, okay, I wasn't young, I was 29, he was 34. I didn't marry him for his money. It wasn't an arranged marriage. Didn't have to marry him to keep him in the country. I mean, I would go through this in my mind. I'm like, why did I marry him? Why are we married? You know, and then I finally was like, I think he came at the right time. I was ready to be married, and he was the guy I was dating, and that's why we got married. And I really forgot. But when I forced myself to remember, I was like, no, okay. And I could remember these happy memories if I would allow myself to remember them. Because we try to shut those down. That's how we protect ourselves from the hurt. You know, the pain of the bad marriage is painful, and so we try to convince ourselves that we never loved our spouse, and we shut down that love. But you have to feel it again. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable to save your marriage. And so if you can remember why you fell in love, what did you love about him, what did you love about her, why did you fall in love, why did you get married? Because you had a wedding. People came, someone gave made a toast, you were happy one day. Why? Why were you happy? Think about it. And when I was really thinking about this, what I did was, I wrote my husband a love letter when I finally came up with it. And it took me a long time. And he wrote me one too, and it was interesting. It was very easy for him to write his love letter to me. He's not a writer, but it was excruciating for me to write one to him. I actually would go to my friends and ask them, like, why did you fall in love with your husband? Like, as if that was going to help me. And, but I eventually figured it out. And it was a very sweet moment when we exchanged those letters, so I highly encourage you to do it. Imagine your perfect mate. You know, at some point, close your eyes and think about a fantasy, the person who is your everything. It might not be a real person in life. It might be a totally made-up person. It might be someone from the movies. It might be someone you know. And don't be ashamed of this. Really imagine this person. How do they treat you? What are the fantasies that you see? Because it's those fantasies, those things that you're yearning for in your marriage and you're not getting. And so if you can really examine this and say, okay, in my fantasies, I know the fantasies I had were always of this flirtatious stage of somebody wooing me and of feeling loved by somebody else, because that's what I didn't feel in my marriage. And so if you can allow yourself to have these fantasies, you're like, that's what I'm missing. Okay, that's what I want, because it's so hard to know what you want. You just know what you don't want a lot of times when you're in a bad marriage. The fantasies will help you figure out what you really do want. Okay. And then another thing you can do right now is to pick one thing to let go, one thing to forgive. Because what happens, especially when marriage goes really bad, we start keeping a tally. We're like, yeah, you know why you're bad? Because when I moved in with you, you didn't clean out a closet for me. There were no clothes, I didn't have anywhere to hang my clothes. That's how mine started, from the moving in incident. And it would go all the way to, oh my goodness, you know, that he wasn't there, like my first night in the hospital, he didn't stay. My mother ended up staying with me. It was like one thing after another. When I was pregnant, you never wanted to have sex with me. It was a big long list. And I had to forgive the past. You have to be able to move forward. And so to take one thing now and say, you know what, she said she was sorry, he said he was sorry, we've already talked about this, we've been over this, I'm going to stop stockpiling this issue, let it go. Allow yourself to forgive. You need to go from this day forward, healing, moving on to a better marriage. And then I sort of talked about this. Try to think of ways you can show your spouse that you love him or her. Little things you can do every day that say I love you without actually saying them verbally. Of course you can say them verbally, but hugs, like my husband makes the coffee for me, the attaboys, those little gestures, the bringing someone breakfast, making his favorite vegetable. You know, it could be, it's different in every relationship, but think of ways to do that, how you say I love you over and over and over again, because love really is a verb, it's in the behavior, and that's how you feel good about each other, knowing that you were doing these small things to support each other, to make each other's days go a little bit more easy. And the last thing I highly encourage you to do is to write your spouse's eulogy. Not because you want your spouse to drop dead, but because the eulogy, number one, is going to make you realize everything that you want to change, because your first attempts are going to be that good for nothing, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be a big, long negative thing. You're like, okay, we need to work on those things. Okay, that's stuff we need to work on. But you're eventually going to get to the positive place. I'm going to read you the eulogy that I wrote for my husband. No, I did. I wrote his eulogy. I have it ready. If he ever dies, I'm prepared. I wrote it to our daughter because she's only 4 right now, and in my mind I was thinking, gosh, she might not even remember him. That's sad. And but I just want you to see that what could come off as being something that you hate, when your marriage gets to a good place, it becomes something that is incredibly endearing. This isn't all positive, but these are all things that I love about my husband. Okay. Your father was a difficult man. I do not say this out of nastiness. I say it because it's true. I can't think of a friend of his who would not agree with that statement. His own mother would agree with me. Actually, she'd tell you that he was a colossal pain in the ass. He was. He at times disagreed with me for the sport of it. He did it because he was so competitive that he had to win every argument, even if he was wrong. But when he really was wrong, he tended to right himself. He even started folding the laundry correctly, the way I suggested, once he realized that I was right and he was wrong. He just couldn't bring himself to tell me that he was doing it, and I didn't call attention to it. He had a freckly exterior at times. I'm convinced a harsh word from him would have been enough to make a serial killer do an about-face. He never raised his voice, but he had a way of talking that could bring the biggest, strongest man to his knees. Despite this, he really was a softie. He was the one who wanted the dog to sleep on our bed instead of on the floor. He was the one who would buy you nearly anything you wanted, and at night he always covered you with the blanket even though you kicked it right back off. He had a kind heart. He visited some of his customers because they lived alone and he knew they were lonely. If someone was new in town, he helped that someone find friends and feel welcome. If anyone needed help with pretty much anything, he was always the first to volunteer, but he never wanted to be thanked, and he never wanted others to know what he had done. He preferred to have others believe that he was a cold, heartless, selfish person. He'd hate that I told others this, but he loved to point out the first flowers that bloomed in the spring. He would stand by the magnolia tree when it was covered with flowers, and he'd say, "Look at our tree, do you see all of the flowers? Can you smell them?" And he truly didn't know a tulip from a daffodil, but he knew that we smiled when we looked at those flowers, and so he would always point out the first burst of yellow, red, or purple of the year. And your father was a class clown. Did you know that at our wedding, he pretended to pull a pair of panties out from under my dress when he was supposed to be getting the garter? Yeah. Your father did that, and my grandparents were watching. On April Fool's Day, when you were 4, he tried to get you to tell me that you'd accidentally pooped in your bed. You didn't do it, and I thank you for that. Your father was competitive. He sulked for weeks when a friend of his made an offhand comment about him being a slow cyclist. He wasn't slow, though. He was proficient in every physical pursuit he tried. He was a good rock climber. He was good at windsurfing. He was a pretty good runner, too, which drove me crazy because I was a runner and I sucked at it, and he never trained for it, and he was good at it. He was a natural when it came to athletic talent, which was a good thing because he hated to lose. If I congratulated him for a second place, he would say, "Second is the first loser." Many parents let their kids win at board games and other things. No, not your father. He repeatedly beat your pants off at Chutes and Ladders before races. Whenever he played anything with you, I knew it would end in tears. He had a winning affliction. I thought it served him right when after a bike race he came in second and you looked him in the eye and you said, "Dad, why did you lose?" I had to sit him down though and explain to him that he had to let you win every once in a while. It was only fair. And that was the hardest lessons for him. And when he let you win, that's how I knew how much he loved you. He would have done anything for you. He did still slip up and beat you every once in a while, but that was endearing because that made me know he was imperfectly human. Your father made the best barbecue chicken I've ever tasted, and he knew it. He loved apple strudel, he loved lamb, he loved sour beer, and he loved a good espresso. He despised vinegar and any food that tasted remotely like it, and I could always count on him to give me his pickles and olives. He had a secret love of junk food, one that you shared together. You and your daddy savored Cheetos, potato chips, and other junk food whenever I turned my back. But I love that you shared those loving moments together, even if you end up with heart disease later in life. Your father loved the bike. If he didn't get in a ride, he was the grouchiest human being on the planet. He loved speed, he loved driving fast, he loved riding motorcycles, he loved fear and danger. If you could get killed doing it, he loved it. He was fearless. I retrieved him from the emergency room more times than I care to think about. He has scars on his shin, his knees, his hips, and his shoulder blades, and he wore them with honor. Most of all, though, he loved you and he loved me. He loved us more than his own life and more than his bike. That he did. So that is it. But I encourage you to write this for your spouse, because in writing it, you will see how much you love your spouse, and exchange it, because it really is a love letter. And I always wondered, like we always say these wonderful things about people after they die, and don't you ever think, gosh, I wish we would have said that when that person was still alive. And this is your chance to eulogize your spouse while your spouse is still alive. So I'm here for questions if anybody has questions. I have some, those hot pink heart cards that are out on the table outside, have my URL on it if you want to go to my website. And I will have a book coming out in a year and a half, so there's some sign-up sheets out there. They're going to collect your names, and I can let you all know when the book comes out. So thank you.